Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Dear viewers, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. Peace be upon you and upon all the oppressed around the world who are struggling for their freedom, for their rights, and for their dignity, for their honor, who are struggling against all kinds of oppression, transgression, and global arrogance. Welcome to this week's Open Dialogue, the discussion program here live at Ahlebait Television. Today's topic that we have chosen for discussion with our panel of expert guests is patience in adversity. The Holy Quran in Surah Al-Baqarah, God says, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, وَبَشِّرِ الصَّابِرِينَ الَّذِينَ إِذَا أَصَابَتْهُمْ مُصِيبَةٌ قَالُوا إِنَّا لِلَّهِ وَإِنَّا إِلَيْهِ رَاجِعُونَ. Give good tidings to the patient ones, who when disaster strikes, they say, indeed, we belong to Allah, and indeed, to Him we shall return. However, we will discuss with our guests today the reasons why adversity and difficult times exist. We will ask the scholar to explain, why does evil exist? Why do we have to go through these hard times? And how do we cope with them? What does religion say? And how can we exercise patience in reality, in measurable terms? We will also discuss with our expert psychotherapist guest the effects that violence and the effects of trauma on the people who are caught in these situations, and also, in particular, the children. So let me introduce the guests for tonight. We have with us Brother Zabair Hussain. Brother Zabair Hussain is a qualified and trained cognitive behavioral psychotherapist. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Brother Zabair, it's nice having you again on the program.
Wa alaikum assalam. Thank you very much for having me on here again, Zainab.
A warm welcome, thank you. We are also, dear viewers, joined for today's discussion by Hujjatul Islam wal Muslimin, Sayyid Mohammad Razavi, who is a lecturer and a speaker. Currently, he is the resident scholar and the head of the Religious Advisory Board at the Shia Islamic Education Society in London, where he deals with family issues and he resolves them in accordance to the Islamic law. Assalamu alaikum, Sayyid. Good to see you this week.
Wa alaikum assalam. Thank you for hosting the program, and thank you for our guest for accepting our invitation.
Certainly, yes. Sayed, before we dive into this topic of patience in adversity, I was just watching the news today and I heard that the situation in Pachanar in Pakistan is quite dire at the moment. If you could just shed a bit of light for the viewers as to the situation that the Pachanar believing community is facing at the moment, in particular the Shia community in Pachanar.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Unfortunately, this area of Pakistan has gone through so many difficulties and problems throughout its history, and off and on we see that the areas targeted, and unfortunately the innocent people's life is taken away. And we could look at this from many different angles and many different points of views. This area is targeted in particular times of year when national and international enemies want to put pressure on the community. And they find this area as one of the areas where they can easily target and run away. We have seen this area to be as extremely secure when the authorities want it to be secure. And suddenly the same area which is considered to be very secure and safe becomes the victim and target of these international and national terrorists who come and target these innocent people. But no doubt these kind of atrocities and oppressions that have been committed against Muslims, especially Shia Muslims, has become a kind of norm and kind of strong point for resistance amongst the Shia Muslim community. They have fought and struggled and survived with patience and resistance throughout 1,400 years of history of Islam. They have always been victims of oppression from authorities, leaders, and the elements in the society. So same practice that existed in the past continues, but what they don't know that this doesn't weaken the true believers around the world, and whatever is happening in the world at the moment is also an evidence that it increases in the support of the oppressed people of the world, and the oppressors are disclosed to the world, and people realize, and this is how Imam Mahdi Ajalallah Ta'ala Farajahu will take power of the world, because by the time he comes, majority of the people would start following the truth, the way we are witnessing nowadays around the world, that how people are raising voices and their concerns in favor of oppressed people and against the oppressors of the world. So we hope and pray that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is looking and watching what is going on, and He is the best of the planners, and His planning will finally succeed over the oppressors who are oppressing innocent people and killing people and innocent children and ladies of the world.
Definitely, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala comes to the aid of the oppressed because, and this conscience of people when they find out is awakened. But Brother Zabair, Sayyid here now mentioned a crucial issue of security. Everybody has a right to be secure in whatever state that they live in. And people of Pachanar and other people around the world are suffering this insecurity, which is a basic human right of everybody. But I'm just curious to know the impact of this uncertainty amongst these insecure times when people don't feel secure in their own land and not provided security by the authorities that they live under. What is the particular impact of this uncertainty on individuals and in particular on children?
Sure. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad. I just wanted to start with a small quote, which is also referenced in the Geneva Convention and the UN Charter of Right to Life and the Rights of Children. The quote is by Graca Machel, and it says, "It is unforgivable that children are assaulted, violated, murdered, and yet our conscience is not revolted, nor our sense of dignity challenged. This represents a fundamental crisis in our civilization." And essentially what this quote is telling us, that every child, every human being has a right to life. They have the right to thrive, not just physically, but psychologically as well. And before I go into the psychological details of this, I think what's really important, what we need to think about when we talk about the concept of patience, and we even talk about concept of security and protection, these are adult concepts. Explaining the concept of patience to a child is incredibly difficult because they will not understand that concept. Explaining the concept of patience, waiting, security, what's going on in this world, and in particular at this time in what's happening in the world, is extremely challenging. Explaining this to a young child, because again, these are complete adult concepts. Children at that age are there to play, are there to thrive, are there to enjoy life, not to be practicing patience and not to be practicing safety and finding shelter and security. This is a fundamental right we have, that every child has access to care, security, health care, education, which unfortunately we can see at this point in time in the world, children are not having access to this. And if we think about even prior to a young child, even the child in the fetus of the mother, if the mother is in a place or environment where there is no security, there is no safety, there is threat, the level of stress and cortisol that fetus is being exposed to is absolutely incredible. And even before the child is born and brought into the world, it will experience some effects of stress, distress, and anxiety just by being in the fetus, because the mother's experiencing such high levels of stress and distress as well. So I guess what I really want to express here, that we are talking about adult concepts around patience, security, and safety. And this for a child can be incredibly difficult, and we cannot expect children to self-soothe. We cannot expect children to grasp this concept and be able to execute and exercise this concept as well. Children, when they are young in their developmental years, they're always learning through the process of assimilation and accommodation. And it's very hard for them to comprehend what disasters are going on, why this disaster is occurring, and if there's even any light at the end of the tunnel. It's very hard for them to understand this. As adults, we have full comprehension of the world. We have comprehension of why some sort of unrest might be occurring and the political factors behind that. But unfortunately, a young child will never understand this concept. And therefore, it is absolutely vital we need to think about their basic fundamental needs before we even think about their further needs or how they can thrive in such an environment as well.
A very interesting point you raised there. But Sayed, Brother Zabair said it's difficult to explain to children whose age at that time is to play and to explore the world and not to be confronted by these stresses that adults may sometimes understand, but children will never understand. However, when we look at the events in the world today, even adults are finding it difficult to grasp as to why would so much evil come out, and the murders that we see, the hatred, the arrogance that we see, uh, adults are finding it difficult to fathom. So, say that from the religious point of view, what would you say to people who are finding it difficult to understand why would this kind of evil and suffering even be existent in the world? What is it that's causing people to steep to such low levels to inflict this kind of pain and suffering on other human beings?
Yes, I don't know what we look at when we look at the society, and especially the interpretation that are made of how should we live and what should we have in this world. It really confuses all of us. The modern psychologists and psychotherapists and experts say that we should not make our children aware of all these, or we should not make our children go through the difficulties like this. But the worldly life is like this. So, what should we do? If we look at the history and the life of our Imams and Prophets, none of our Imams or Prophets lived a very peaceful life. They went through difficulties, atrocities, problems, and survived. So, is that a lesson for us that we should teach our children while we are going through these difficulties, that they should come out as a braver child who can face the difficulties of the world? Or should we raise our children in a way that if even an ant comes towards them, they become scared and start crying and unable to deal with the small problem and trouble in their life? Let me give you an example of Hazrat Fatima Zahra salawatullah alayha. If we look at her life, she was born in a family whose father and mother were going through difficulties. Hazrat Fatima Zahra salawatullah alayha witnessed how her father became victim and target of hate, and people used to throw stones and rubbish on him, and he used to come home injured and hurt, and her mother and her used to bravely face him, clean him, and understand the problems, and would become stronger in their faith and iman, and survive in the problems of the society and grow and become a stronger person. It was same. It was Bibi Fatima Salawatullah Alaiha who went through the period when they were expelled from Mecca, and they had to live in hiding. And the life in hiding was not easy. The children who were growing up, including Fatima Zahra Salawatullah Alaiha, had to go through hell. People didn't have enough food. They used to share one piece of date between several soldiers and children and all of them. There was very little water and all of these difficulties. But those children who went through those difficulties survived and became a stronger believer and a stronger personality later on for the Muslim world, and they became role models for all of us. So at present, whatever is going on in the world is also making the children who are going through these atrocities and difficulties a stronger person uh, in the society, and they will be stronger leaders, stronger survivors, and better human being who would understand the difficulties and pains and problems of the world and face them. Nowadays, usually, we are forced to not to let our children even see blood or atrocities and difficulties or clips like that to the children. I think when these kind of oppressions take place, we should make our children aware of what is going on and make them understand who is right and who is wrong, so they become a stronger personality instead of just being a scared person who would not be even able to run his personal life in future. So the psychologists have to look at the situation differently, and maybe when they are counseling these children, should adopt the method that Prophet Muhammad and Imams and Bibi Zainab, and look at what happened in Karbala. What did Bibi Zainab Salatullah Alaiha did that her children and future children became the source of spread of Islam, and they became the stronger role models. So this is what we need to follow and learn and study from that. And this is why it is important in our Masaib that when we are discussing the tragedies of Karbala, the ulama and scholars have to explain the aim of the people who sacrificed their life, and then explain the mission, what is important for them in this life and the world hereafter. Then they can become a better role model in future.
you've raised quite a few points there that I would like Brother Zabair to clarify as the psychologist that we have and the psychotherapist on the program. Of course, you discussed about the hunger and difficulties that were faced by earlier Muslims at the time of Rasulullah and Lady Fatima Zahra when she was a child. In fact, Sha'bi Abi Talib, just before Bibi Khadija passed away, they were forced to eat grass
Yeah.
and because of the lack of any food and drink. So, of course, from that arises the question as to what impact does the lack of these basic needs of that children need or people need, like food and water, what impact does that have on children? But also, you raised another point there that I would like Brother Zabair to pick up from also, is that that we have a mission that we should focus on, and the graphic images that we see. Uh, how can people deal with this? How can they introduce? Although children have to be made aware, but what is the fine line that shouldn't be crossed, and how can these subjects be introduced to people who are living relatively in comfort and security? So, for them to just suddenly be exposed to such images, it's very traumatic. How can adults deal with this situation from the psychological point of view? And then the other point of the, I'll come back to that. If you can address this first, as to what is the appropriate way of introducing children and adults to such atrocities.
Sure, no problem. I just wanted to come back to some of Molana's points. I think Molana's eloquently and beautifully explained the role of resilience in terms of building resilience from a young age so they can tolerate adversity later in life. And I completely agree, because no one escapes life unscathed. And this is where faith-based healing comes in. And this is where our faith helps us, because even in the Holy Quran, it says we were created to be tested, right? So there's already this concept that life will never be easy. Life is not easy, but we will all be tested, and everyone's tested on this spectrum slightly differently. However, what I would like to add here, and I guess this might be slightly conflicting to what Molana has mentioned here, but I think there's some harmony we can come to as well. Mashallah, the Molana spoke eloquently of the Masumeen, and we aspire to be like the Masumeen. But unfortunately, what we cannot forget is that we are fallible, they were infallible. They had a level of spirituality and resource that we can only aspire to be towards. However, as fallible human beings, we are susceptible to our faith being in crisis, our bodies and minds being subject to stress, anxiety, PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, attachment disorder, and depression and trauma later in life as well. And I guess this is something that I'd like to focus on here, thinking about the events of the world at the moment and the psychological impact this has on children and individuals. And when we think about the stories of Karbala, and there's a masayib which I'll mention at the end of the show, that the caregivers were always present for the children at some point. Unfortunately, what we are seeing at this point in life and in this point in the world is that the caregivers themselves are being killed. So a child will turn to their mom, dad for some hope, for some soothing, for a hug. Unfortunately, if the parent has been killed, the child is destitute. It does not know where to turn to. And unfortunately, the world we live in, it's not a great world. People will exploit a child, people will take advantage of that child, and therefore that child will be vulnerable. Also, because children at that age struggle to self-soothe, as adults we can be our own heroes, right? We can learn to be patient, we can learn to self-soothe. Children look for that externally. So if the caregiver is not present, or let's say the caregiver's been injured in a bomb blast, um, or they're preoccupied with just keeping the family safe and even trying to get some bread or water, the caregiver will not be emotionally available to the child. So there's a break in that attachment to that child, and this will have some impact on the child as well. And also, whilst the child is growing up, their concept of safety, security, trusting the world, trusting others, trusting the future as well is going to be compromised. But of course, faith will help in that. because faith in God and in a higher purpose will really help heal some of those compromised concepts in that child. But one thing that I really wanted to kind of stress and mention, what we see in clinic, unfortunately, children or adults or adolescents who have been exposed to considerable trauma. So this is not one single incident of trauma. This is trauma along a considerable period of time and multiple trauma. Unfortunately, they can grow up to suffer from what we call CPTSD, complex PTSD, which has quite long lasting impact on the psychological health and psychological well-being. The added difficulty and dynamic we have here is that we're not even able to get aid or psychological support to these people. So they are suffering in silence. They do not have access to this form of aid, which would at least bring some hope or even start those first steps of healing. So it's incredibly challenging. However, when thinking about introducing resilience or introducing some level of understanding for children who are maybe in a privileged position and do not understand what's happening in the world, I think I personally I'm not in favor of shock treatment where you can show graphic images to children. I think I'm more in favor of a more gradual approach where you can even educate them through play. So just like we take our children sometimes on some majalises where they have the theatre almost, where they're explaining to the children what's happened, what disasters occurred, and what pain the children of the Ahlebait went through play, through theatre. It can be incredibly empowering, but also healing as well. Because when we treat young children with post-traumatic stress disorder who have been through awful trauma, play is one of the strongest tools we use to help them understand why this happened, why this occurred, but now they are in a place of security. So I think when we are educating ourselves, especially, and our children, because we need to know, and our children also need to know, that those in less privileged positions, what harm they're going through, what difficulties, what tests they're going through, we can do this through play and we can do this through education as well. And I think it's really important, like the Maulana beautifully mentioned, children need to know this, because if they know this, they can develop compassion. Ignorance is bliss, right? If they're unaware of what's happening in the world, there'll be no motivation to help those who are in need. And therefore, it's our responsibility as adults that we educate the next generation that there is a population out there who's absolutely suffering, who's absolutely in pain. And we need to create that compassion, empathy, and sympathy, and that sense of faith in our children and the next generation, so they can help that entire generation. And we do not have an entire generation who is too scared to discuss adversity, to help others, or even reach out to people, because it's so comfortable to live in the comforts of our own home. But we need to be aware of the pain going on out there as well.
How much would you expose them to the graphic images that we see, which is a reality on the ground for many people?
I guess when thinking about exposing children to graphic images, we really need to think, what's the function behind this? Am I thinking of scaring them? Am I thinking of making them aware? Am I thinking of educating them? But like I mentioned, I would always suggest think of the most non-evasive way of educating the child. If my purpose is to educate the child of the pain a child's going through, I can think of other non-evasive ways. So maybe I can explain or even use puppets, even figures or even toys to explain how somebody may be hurting, what part of their body might be broken as well. It's not necessary we show these complete blood images, which is a reality. Please do not get me wrong. But sometimes children do not have the capacity to comprehend that, accommodate that in their mind as well. And this is why we need to approach it with some sensitivity with children as well. I will put this into context with you. For example, if you approach somebody with a learning difficulty or disability with an IQ of maybe a 10-year-old, we wouldn't be exposing them to graphic images and expecting them to understand what's going on in that image. Similarly, we would be breaking that information down for them in pictorial form, in play form, so they can understand in their way of thinking, rather than me imposing my way of thinking on the child.
And
I would
up to
like to
what
add.
age group?
Yeah, I would like to add
Go
a
ahead, Sayyid.
point regarding the play. I mean, unfortunately, especially the Muslims who have migrated have forgotten quite a lot of the traditions that used to be practiced in back home. For example, in Iran, Iraq, they used to have plays during Muharram, and those plays were extremely popular. And the children, I personally, when I was growing up as a child in Qom, used to go to these plays, and those images of the play, of the same thing which Maulana would be saying on the mimbar, are engraved in my mind more than what Maulana used to say, because I witnessed and saw how the whole tragedy took place, although there was no blood, no graphic images, but it was a play. And we once, I remember, brought a whole group of theatre from Iran to London, and they were welcomed in Oxford University, Cambridge University, London University, and in all Hussainiyas. And I remember in Islamic Centre of England, when we used to have those plays, the hall was fully packed, and majority of those who used to come to see these plays, these live plays of tragedy of Karbala, there were youngsters and children and ladies, and they would then, when they were coming out of the center, they would discuss, oh, who was this and who was that, and how did he do it, and how cruel he was. So they themselves were interpreting who was oppressor and who was oppressed. So this is a better method of educating our children and bringing them up as a brave child, uh, and a brave leader of the future. If our
Mhm.
leaders are scared, our children are brought up in an environment that are constantly scared, 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 they wouldn't be able to run our community in future.
Yes, I mean, I feel that many adults also are finding it very difficult to cope with directly watching the harrowing images that we see nowadays coming from on the media. But Sayed, brother Zabair here mentioned an important point, and that is that faith, using faith to heal, and also the fact that children who do not have who lose their support network, the adults in their family, their parents, their uncles, their extended family members, are open to exploitation. What I want to ask you here, Sayed, is although faith can be used to heal, but there are what we find is that religious text is being used in order to justify violence and in order to justify committing atrocities on another people. As a religious scholar, somebody who represents Islam, what would you
Mm.
like to say regarding?
Well, Islam is very clear. It has rules and regulations for every action that we take in our life, including in battlefield. There are rules and regulations that Islamic soldiers have to abide and follow. Those principles: they should not destroy farms, they should not uh, hurt and harm innocent um, people, and they should only get engaged with the ones who are getting engaged with to them and with them directly. And that is why a true Islamic soldier would take care of this. Imam Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salatu wasalam, and all our infallible imams are the best examples, or those who were taking the side of Ahlebait alayhi salatu wasalam, and following their commands. They used to practice all of these principles in their daily life, including in battlefield. So
Uh,
we have to abide by those principles, and only do what is our duty. That's it.
Definitely. Unfortunately, we have approaching the end of the program in 20 minutes. We have 20 minutes still. So just to give you an idea of, if you need to make any certain points regarding this topic, to cover them in that amount of time. Brother Zabair, there is of course an impact of all of these conflicts on children when their basic needs are not met. You already mentioned when their parents are lost and they are looking for comfort and uh, they don't find any adult to refer to, they can be exploited. But also, what are the other impacts that children can have when they are experiencing lack of safety, lack of security, lack of basic needs,
Sure,
such as
I'm
food?
so pleased yeah, I'm so pleased you mentioned this, Sister Zainab. So one thing that I will describe here is recently there's been images from Pakistan and all over the world, right? And you see a child covered in dust, and he's silent. He's just staring. He's startled. He's scared. He's frightened. But there's no verbal expression. He's not crying. He's just silent. He's just staring into thin space. And we've all seen these pictures on the media or social media. And for me, through a mental health professional's eyes, that for me is a form of dissociation. So when our brains can no longer cope with the emotional and physical pain, it switches off. And this is what we call dissociation. We dissociate. So the child has gone into this dissociative stage where they can't cry at that stage. They can't make eye contact and they look quite lost. Like you will notice their pupils are diluted. So unfortunately, one of the things that can happen, unlike adults who can articulate, I am in pain, I am feeling scared, I need help or support. Unfortunately, children may not have reached that level of maturity to articulate their needs or even express their needs. So this is the first difficulty. They may dissociate, they may not be able to express their needs and their concerns, and they may become avoidant or the opposite, become extremely clingy with an individual because they just need something or someone to hold on to, or the other end of the spectrum where the child becomes completely avoidant because their fear levels, anxiety levels, and their fight and flight response has been so activated and they are in this hyper arousal mode, they will not be able to relax, rest, or even trust anyone. And this is the biggest impact of children of war. Generations that have been brought up in war often struggle to make relationships later in life. So they struggle to even trust professionals because they've been brought up in an environment where things can change rapidly and things can change for the worse overnight. And of course, we do know that children of this nature who have been subjected to war, subjected to absolute violence and assault and these awful images. They may have even witnessed their families being killed. They're going to grow up becoming extremely depressed. So there's going to be this heightened sense of hopelessness, worthlessness as well, because their self-esteem will be damaged because they struggle to even believe in themselves because they've seen so much failure in their life as well. And I think, Alhamdulillah, this is where, again, psychological support and faith can come in to empower that child as well. But one thing we see extremely commonly is heightened level of stress and anxiety, which manifests as PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. And this is where the child is having flashbacks, nightmares. And even once the child is in a place of safety, for them, they're reliving that event, even though they're going through it almost in the here and now, even though they may have escaped that sense of adversity. For them, it still feels real. And this is how trauma can really impact a child and individual as well. And, one thing that I would really, really like to stress here, and I think it's really important, it's difficult. We are at a distance. We can only show solidarity. We can, of course, try our best to support noble causes as well. But it's really important, like the Mulana beautifully said, and Imam Ali alayhi salam beautifully described rules and regulations in every department of our life. Equally, there are rules and regulations with how children should not be subjected to certain atrocities in wars, how we should keep their line of healthcare open, education open, and security. And once these rules and regulations get violated, this is where it becomes really painful. Because even in the Geneva Convention, there are psychological rules and regulations how one should conduct war so children are least impacted. And why is that? Because we know they will be more impacted than adults.
I
Well,
was involved in I was involved in one of these incidents. I mean, I was helping a rescue team, and they told me that look for the people who are silent, those who have become victim and bleeding and crying and shouting. They will get attention, but look for the people who don't know, who are totally lost, who are not reacting at all. Pay attention to them, give comfort to them, or speak to them, and then we will have to follow a certain procedure in helping these people, because these people are the ones who will take longer to recover.
Well,
So
I'll
I
come to
mean,
you, brothers. Picking up from the point that the Sayyid make is that what are the helps that are available and how we can, in the long term, help the situation of the children affected in these situations. Sayyid, this will be my final question before the conclusions to the program. Of course, the Ayatollah Khomeini has said every day is Ashura and every land is Karbala, and we gain our strength from the event of Karbala and from the stand of Imam al-Hussain alayhi salam and his children. You both mentioned the Imma and the infallibles, but also the caravans that they had and the support network within their family they had were not infallible, infallible people, were all fallible individuals, their children and their wives and so on. However, we find that many people, when we say that today, argue back and they say nothing can be compared to Karbala. And there is no pain like the pain of Imam al-Hussein. So I would like you to explain a little bit briefly this statement of Imam al-Khomeini and how it applies to us, because many ulama also say that, on the day of judgment, we will not be asked about Karbala, it was before our era, but we will be asked about the oppressions that are happening in our society today. If you can just elaborate a little bit to help people understand these points.
yeah, when we say every earth is Karbala and every day is Ashura, this is what it means, that atrocities, oppression, similar to Karbala, although nothing can be compared to Karbala, and Karbala is the reason of the survival of Islam, because if Imam Hussain والسلام, had not stood firm against the oppressive rulers and corrupt rulers of the time, we would not get the message. So this is the message that we have from Imam Hussain والسلام. Be like Imam Hussain and stand firm like Imam Hussain. If you want to pass on the message of Islam, you have to be like Imam Hussain and pass the message on by following his path and being positive and firm in your faith and iman. Iman is the most precious thing that we have, and if we lose that, we have lost everything. So this is what Imam Hussain alayhi salatu wasalam taught us, and in difficult times, especially the Muslims in Parachanar who have gone through atrocities and difficulties and problems. I'm sure the families are crying and they have lost beloved ones, uh, and same thing in other places of the world where I've seen clips, a child sitting on top of a rubble and telling that I've lost my father, I've lost my sister, I've lost my cousin, I've lost my mother, I've lost my grandmother, I've lost my friend, I've lost my pet, and so on. He's going on and on. And that same child is saying that I believe in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and I will be patient and I will follow the message of my father who he wanted me to be strong. So this child has got the message and he is going to continue the path. We have the similar responsibility from the tragedies that are happening around us, in like what happened in Parachanar and what happened in Karbala, that we should continue the path of Imam Hussain alayhi salatu wasalam.
So yes, here actually another question just came up in my mind is that at the time of Imam al-Hussein, of course, we know that the Battle of Karbala was the distinguishing battle between falsehood and between truth, between right and wrong. Uh, Today, Yazid, though at that time also pretended to play the victim. How can individuals, lay people who are away from this, distinguish between who is the real victim? Because Imam al-Hussein, we know, was the victim, but Yazid at that time played the victim. And he also had propaganda machines that helped him out. Uh, how can people distinguish the real victimhood and where this lies?
Well, this is where we need to have basira, and many of the Muslims who invited Imam Hussain alayhi salatu wasalam, they were reciters of Quran. They used to pray 5 times daily prayers, and yet they killed Imam Hussain alayhi salatu wasalam. They didn't have the basira. So this is what we need to pray for. It is easy to call yourself Muslim but not have basira. So we need to have the basira ourselves and educate our children to be aware of everything, the way Imam Hussain taught his own family and followers to have the basira and vision, the right vision of the future, and which describe their responsibility and duty towards themselves and the future.
Surely there should be a clear line, though, that distinguishes who is right and who is wrong. Things are not a gray area. I would come back to you with this question, Sayed, again to clarify with your conclusion. But Brother Zabair, my last question to you is how now you've explained how children can suffer when they are experiencing trauma under these violent circumstances. But how can we now focus on the long-term impact that these children would have and the intergenerational effect that you mentioned earlier, and how can we move on from this situation and help them?
Sure. Before I answer that, I just want to recite something we normally hear in Muharram or at Majalis. Just a really quick maside here, that the days of our youth are the days of our glory. What hopes and feelings surge in young hearts during this time of life. For every nerve and tender quivers with the joy of living. But there are some youths to whom the cup of life is dealt in another measure. There are some budding flowers that are destined to be swept away by the hot desert winds before they have the opportunity to bloom. So we know here the Imam's already telling us that unfortunately there will be a generation, there will be some youths who will not have that glory of youth where you should be playing, where you should be living life, and where you should be thriving. So we already know that there will be adversity, there will be difficulty in life, but we need to think about solutions as well. And I think the key thing over here, Sister Zainab, you mentioned, is long term. So what we need to think about is sustainable solutions. One of the things that I mentioned earlier, there's a break in attachment. So when a child loses their mom, dad to a shooting, to a bomb, to a killing, wherever, there's been that break in attachment, and that can trigger significant anxiety and insecurity, which will impact them later in life. What can happen is aid and charities can go in, right? And we see this all the time on social media. They go there carrying a box of water, supply, rice, take all the pictures with the children as well, and then they leave. What is this telling the child? That I will just leave you just like your parents left you, just like everybody else left you, and I will walk away. Again, it's temporary soothing for the child, but then the child will be in a state of distress because another adult has just left them who they trusted. So the child will learn not to trust others because they will leave me. So one of the solutions we need to focus on is something that is sustainable. So, of course, at the moment, it's difficult to think about psychological needs because practical needs are not being met, let alone psychological needs. But once the dust has settled, we need to really think about long-term and sustainable solutions because that is essential in providing reliable, sustainable care that we can demonstrate. Actually, the world is still okay. People will not leave you. And I think, inshallah, I hope that people who are suffering in Pakistan and in other areas of the world can see our solidarity. And when the chance does comes up, I think people who are in privileged positions in the West or wherever they are in the world, it's our duty to reach out, help, and serve. No matter which way that might be, it's our duty to help others and serve others as well. And I think one thing that's really important when we talk about psychological therapy and trauma therapy, we often talk about processing difficult memories which the person has gone through. And I think what's really important is that we don't forget those memories. We learn from those memories. Those memories are there for a reason, not just to teach the victim something, but also to teach us something. So we shouldn't forget adversity does happen, and we need that compassion there to help each other and support each other.
Of course, you mentioned this, that people have these long-term memories. I'm just curious here briefly, Brother Zabair, how can these kind of memories affect people's lives in the future? Because that's an important point also to understand. For these people are going to grow up and have relationships. How is this going to, in these kind of memories, how will they have an impact on these long-term relationships that and in their life?
Sure. So first of all, our brains and bodies are incredibly resilient, right? So let's say you cut your arm or your leg or you break, it naturally heals. It scabs first and then it naturally heals. In a very similar way, some people heal from traumatic memories naturally as well without any intervention. However, some people do not. And those traumatic experiences and memories can shape how we see ourselves, world, and other people as well. And like I mentioned earlier, unfortunately, they can generalize that fear. So one of the main concepts I explain in clinic is fear is generalized, safety is localized. So what I mean by that is, let's say a bomb is dropped outside my house, my brain will then generalize that fear in an evolutionary stance and a survival stance that now everywhere is dangerous for me and I need to keep myself everywhere. Our brain is not that sophisticated that we can just use that as a selection, that this is the place the bomb dropped and therefore everywhere else is safe. Your brain will generalize that fear and it will only localize that safety. Similarly, in relationships, people will become a bit wary. They will be a bit doubtful because they've had people come and go, a break in attachment when they were younger as well. There will always be this sense of self-preservation and self-protection. I should not put myself in a vulnerable position again. So some people manage to have perfectly fine, normal adult relationships, but they may hold back being emotionally expressive or being completely vulnerable to the other person because they're worried, I've been hurt once, I may get hurt again.
Wow, it's very interesting points you've raised there, Brother Zabair. It's really important for us who are away from conflict zones to understand the impact that individuals who have experienced such trauma will have in the future life, so that we can help them. Like you say, knowing that there are people in solidarity with them and who are waiting to help is very important. Sayed, sadly, we have reached the end of the program, so if we can have a concluding comment from both of you, and we'll start with the Sayed, please.
Yes, I would like to say, especially address the Shia Muslims who recite the ziyarat of Imam Hussain, ziyarat Ashura. There is a sentence we all repeat in that ziyarat. We disassociate ourselves from those who remained silent in the killing of Imam Hussain, or those who agreed with the killing of Imam Hussain. So this is the principle that we need to follow in our daily life as well. If you want to call yourself follower of Islam, follower of Ahlebait, follower of true Islam, you cannot remain silent. You cannot even agree with the atrocity. Whoever remains silent, whether it's a TV channel or imam or a leader or wherever they may live, if they agree, they are one of them. If they remain silent, they are one of them. So we pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, may Allah not count amongst those who are silent, who are with the atrocities, and may Allah count us amongst those people who do not agree with the atrocities.
A very important point you've raised there, Sayyid. Brother Zabair, again about patience in adversity for those who are caught up in conflicts and in difficult times, and for those who are away but their hearts are with the ones who are suffering. What is your concluding remark regarding today's topic, please?
Sure. I just wanted to mention, like I mentioned in the beginning of the show, that it's unforgivable, and also it's a crisis of our civilization if we can sit in silence and accept these difficulties and adversities that are occurring. When we attend majalis every year, there's a reason for that, to relive those atrocities and relive what learnings we can take from Karbala. Equally, we need to implement that in our everyday life so we can demonstrate compassion to those who need it, and we can help those who need it as well, because this is the compassion and help and the solidarity that we will be questioned on, at the times of Yawm al-Qiyamah. This is what we will be questioned on. And I think you don't need to be a professional to help. Purely demonstrating charity, compassion, and sympathy and empathy is sufficient. You need to raise awareness. You need to educate the next generation and your own children as well. So calamities of this nature are not repeated generation after generation and after generation. It's our duty to educate as well, which is really important.
Yes, definitely. I mean, unfortunately, human beings, after every genocide, like the Rwanda genocide, like other genocides, always say never again, and yet here we are again. But we are a nation that believes in the day of judgment and the day of reckoning, and there will be a day where the oppressor will be held to account, and that day will be a